Hi, I'm Sally from Shared Interest, and I'm here to do a quick demonstration in how to make the no-bake Brazil nut balls featured in our little book of fairness. I've washed my hands, I've got my apron on, I've weighed out all the ingredients, so let's get started. So I've ground up the Brazil nuts already. I've used a little hand processor here to do that. I'm just showing you now the texture that I've used. It's almost like breadcrumb texture. Depending on who is eating the Brazil nut balls, you might want to make it a bit finer, or you might be happy with it a bit chunkier. Obviously, just be aware of any choking hazard for any young ones that might be sampling the nut balls once you've made them. So I've got 130 grams of Brazil nuts here. So I'm just going to tip those into my mixing bowl. I'm just using a mixing bowl here. I find that an easier way to just throw everything together. So 130 grams of the ground Brazil nuts going in there. If you want an alternative to Brazil nuts, you could perhaps use oatmeal porridge, and perhaps again just grind it up into a texture that you're happy with, or toasted seeds would also work well. Again, you might want to grind those up depending on what type of seeds you're using for that. So I've got my Brazil nuts in my mixing bowl. Next up, I'm going to add my peanut butter. So I've weighed that out. It's sort of about a big tablespoonful, 60 grams is what we've indicated in the recipe, but to give you an idea, it's about a big tablespoonful. And I'm a crunchy peanut butter fan. This is a crunchy household, but you can use smooth if that's what you prefer. I really love the fair trade peanut butter that Liberation do. And so we're going to put some crunchy peanut butter in here now. Again, if you don't want to use peanut butter, you could use coconut butter, which is a relatively similar product. You might be able to find that in local health food shops, that sort of thing nearby. We've got quite a good one locally where I live, or you could search online, perhaps, if you have that capacity to do that. So that's peanut butter gone in with the Brazil nuts. Now, as we've just talked about some of the nuts, I've got some things here to show you that I think might be quite interesting for you. So here I have a candle. It's got a candle inside it, but the shell of the candle is actually a Brazil nut pod or a Brazil nut shell. And it's quite rough. You can sort of see the texture of it there, hopefully. The bottom has been cut smooth so that it sits nicely on a surface. And it's quite thick. You can see it's quite a thick shell to the Brazil nuts to protect those nuts inside. Now, each pod, Brazil nut pod, would hold between 12 and 20 nuts. So I've got some whole Brazil nuts here you can see in the jar. So between 12 and 20 of those would fit into one of these pods. The pods grow on Brazil nut trees, and you might be surprised to hear how tall these trees grow. Brazil nut trees grow to between 30 and 50 meters high, so they're very tall trees. And another interesting thing about Brazil nuts is that you can't farm them. So you can't deliberately grow a Brazil nut tree to try and harvest the Brazil nuts. You have to wait for these pods to fall from the trees. Now, I've just explained that these trees grow to between 30 and 50 meters high. So that's quite a way for something like this to fall. Now, yes, this is filled with candle wax. That's probably a similar, if not lighter weight to 12 to 20 nuts. So that's going to be quite a heavy thing falling from the trees. So the castañeros, or the people who collect the Brazil nuts from the floor of the rainforest, they always wear hard hats to make sure that they're safe while they're doing that. So when you're making these, when you're buying your Brazil nuts, just think a little bit about how those Brazil nuts have come to you. The Brazil nuts I am using have come from one of my local supermarkets. They're fair trade Brazil nuts. They are sourced by that same organization as the peanut butter, Liberation, and they supply Sainsbury's and Tesco's with their own brand fair trade Brazil nuts. So if you have those nearby, you can keep an eye out for those. So just to keep mixing this peanut butter and Brazil nuts is all I've got in here at the moment. So I'm just going to bring that together a little bit with my spatula. Of course, if you have little hands helping you with this, you might want to get them in there, or indeed your own hands, get them in the bowl and do a good mix up together. Gets a little bit messy, but that's what cooking's all about, isn't it? A bit of fun in the kitchen. Get a little bit messy and add to the enjoyment of it. Excellent. Okay, so we've got our peanut butter and our Brazil nuts coming together quite nicely. So you see it's getting a bit more texture to it as the peanut butter binds the ingredients together. Don't be tempted to add any water to the peanut butter to loosen it or anything. It will stick. The peanut butter is here to make everything stick together. So you don't want to make it too damp by adding any extra water to it. So next in is going to be our cocoa powder. So I've just got cocoa powder here. I haven't sieved it. Sometimes cocoa powder gets a bit small lumps in it. I haven't bothered sieving it simply because we're going to be mixing everything together in the bowl here. And in we go. So this is also, again, fair trade cocoa powder. Companies like Divine Chocolate sell fair trade cocoa powder. You can find quite easily in supermarkets nowadays. So I'm just going to mix that together. And this is when the fun bit starts because it looks really good and chocolatey now. So excellent. We'll give that a good mix. And then next up on our ingredients list is some sea salt. So I'm just going to take some sea salt from my salt container here. Now we're looking for 1/4 teaspoon of sea salt. So I'm just sort of taking that as a big pinch. I'm just going to crush this a little bit, just because the flakes can sometimes be quite big. This just helps balance the cocoa. So cocoa powder is obviously a lot more bitter than chocolate, because it doesn't have the other ingredients in it that chocolate has, or hot chocolate powder would have things like sugar added. So the cocoa powder does need something to sort of balance that flavor a little bit. So we'll put the salt in there, give that another mix. There we go. And then lastly, for the ingredients that are going into the bowls is the maple syrup. So 2 tablespoons of maple syrup. I've just measured this into an egg cup here. So I'm just going to pour that slowly into here and give it a good stir as I'm going. And again, the maple syrup is going to help bring everything together and help make it stay in shape. So I'm just going to mix that together. Give it a good stir, and you see it's starting to come into a big lump here. So there we go. So I'm going to leave it there because as we roll it into balls, it'll stick together in the shape that I want it. Now, a little tip for rolling it into balls, and bear with me as I disappear out of shot for a moment, is to wet your hands. So I'm just going to go and give my hands a little run under the cold tap. Just that helps to for the mixture not to stick to your hands. So I'm just going to, I haven't dried my hands on a towel, I've just shaken them off, so they're still a little bit wet. You can see there, they're still a little bit wet there. So I'm just going to take an amount, probably helpfully the same amount as about the size of a Brazil nut, maybe a little bit bigger, in my hands, and roll them into balls. So I've got a nice, well, a ball shape, maybe not quite so round and spherical as an actual ball, but there we go. We've got some coconut. So I've got some desiccated coconut here in the bowl. You can't necessarily see it, but it is in there. And I'm just going to roll the ball in the coconut. And there we have it. One Brazil nut ball. I'm just going to pop that in another bowl where I'm going to collect all of the balls once I've made them. You probably get, depending on the size you make your Brazil nut balls, you probably get about 20 from this volume of mixture. Obviously you make them as big or as small as you like. That's entirely up to you or the people who are going to be sampling them, to eating them. I find that, yeah, 20 is about right for this. You can always have more than one if you want to. And another little tip is that they can freeze okay. as well. So if you make a batch and you don't want to eat them all over the sort of the next few days, you can freeze them. Just make sure you defrost them before you eat them from the freezer, and you can store them in the fridge, and they keep quite well in there. Maybe put them in an airtight container and store them in there. Well, that's, as I continue to roll these balls, I'll leave you there, but thank you very much for joining me. I hope you have fun making these Brazil nut balls, and we'd love to hear from you if you do make them. Pop us a message on social media or drop us an email. And you'll find information about some of the other organizations that I've mentioned, where you can get things like the Brazil nuts and the cocoa powder and things in our links on our website as well. So thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoy, and take care. Bye-bye.